Some stories find us when we least expect them. This one found me on a cold December afternoon in a small town called Millbrook, Pennsylvania. It's about a woman named Margaret Thompson, 68 years old, who had spent 2 years learning how to live alone after losing her husband Harold to cancer. It's about a little dog named Bruno, so thin you could count his ribs, who did something that winter day that still makes my throat tight when I tell it. And it's about his mother, Bella, trapped in a place no one knew about, carrying life inside her while death waited patient as a shadow. If you've ever loved an animal, or lost someone dear, or wondered if there's still a purpose left for you in this world, well, pull up a chair. This story might just be yours too. The eyes found her first, not begging eyes, not the look of a stray hoping for scraps. These were different, desperate, knowing. Margaret Thompson was walking the trail behind her house. Same as every Saturday since Harold passed. The path through Miller's Woods where she went to talk to him. Or maybe just to herself. December air bit through her wool coat. Her left knee ached, weather changing again. Then something grabbed her hem. She stumbled, looked down. A puppy. German Shepherd. Young, but not newborn, maybe 10 months old. Hard to tell with how thin he was. Fur matted with mud. Gray and black beneath the filth. Ribs showing through skin like fingers pressing from inside. And those marks on his back, thin white lines running crossways. Old scars. Healed but permanent. He pulled again. Weak but stubborn. Teeth clamped on her coat, tugging toward the deeper woods. "Well, I'll be," Margaret whispered. The puppy let go, ran 10 feet toward the trees, stopped, turned back to look at her. Waiting. His eyes held something she recognized, the same thing she'd seen in the hospital all those years in patients who couldn't speak but needed her to understand. Help. Please. Now. Margaret's knee throbbed. Common sense said, turn around. Go home. Call someone. But those eyes. She followed. If this little one's courage stirred something in you, I'd love to know where you're reading from today. Drop your hometown below, as the old saying goes. Good stories are meant to be shared. The puppy moved fast for something so thin. Margaret's knee complained with every step downhill, but she kept pace. Branches scratched her sleeves. Dead leaves crunched underfoot. 15 minutes into the woods now. Maybe more. Every few yards. The puppy stopped. Looked back at her. Made sure she was still coming. Then pushed forward again. Patient. Like he understood her body couldn't keep up with his urgency. Slow down, boy, she said. Her breath came short in the cold air. I'm coming. Lord knows I'm trying. Her hand found a tree trunk for balance. Rough bark against her palm. The same hands that had held dying strangers through their last breaths at Millbrook General for 32 years. The same hands that had spooned broth into Harold's mouth those final months when he couldn't lift his own arms anymore. Lung cancer. Never smoked a day in his life. Ain't that just the way? The doctor had said. 2 years now since the funeral. The house still smelled like his aftershave some mornings, though she knew that was impossible. 5 bedrooms, 1 person. She kept the thermostat at 72 because Harold always ran cold, even though her electric bill made no sense for a woman living alone. David called once a month from Seattle. 7 minutes. She counted. Mom, you okay? Good. Work's crazy. Talk soon. Click. This morning. Like every morning. She'd made 2 cups of coffee, poured the second one down the drain. Habit. 41 years of habit don't wash away easy. The puppy barked, sharp, urgent. Margaret looked up. The ground sloped steeper here, dropping towards something she couldn't quite see through the bare trees. The old quarry she remembered now, abandoned since before she and Harold bought the house. The puppy stood at the edge of a drop-off, staring down into the pit below. His whole body trembled. A high whine escaped his throat, thin and desperate. Then Margaret heard it. A sound from below, weak, barely there. Something between a whimper and a moan. She stepped closer to the edge, her knees screaming, her heart pounding against her ribs, looked down, and her hand flew to her mouth. 12 feet down, maybe more. The walls of the old quarry pit dropped straight, slick with moisture and dead leaves. At the bottom, muddy water pooled around rocks and rotted branches. And in the middle of it all, a dog, German shepherd, adult female, lying on her side in the muck, her dark fur matted with mud and something darker. Dried blood, maybe. Her ribs heaved with shallow breaths. One front leg twisted at a wrong angle, tucked against her body. But that wasn't what made Margaret's throat close up. The dog's belly, swollen tight as a drum, round and heavy with life. She was pregnant, close to term, from the look of it. 32 years of nursing, plenty of those in maternity. Margaret knew what a body looked like when it was ready to deliver. The dog lifted her head. Slow, exhausted. Her eyes found Margaret at the edge of the pit, and something flickered there. Not hope, exactly. More like recognition, like she'd been waiting for someone to come. Beside Margaret, the puppy whined. He pressed his body against her leg, trembling, staring down at his mother. His mother. Margaret understood now. This young one had gone looking for help, found her on the trail, brought her here. The only thing he could do when his mother was trapped and dying. Easy, girl. Margaret's voice came out rough. I see you. Help's coming. She fumbled for her phone. Cold fingers. One bar of signal. She punched 911. 911. What's your emergency? There's a dog trapped in the old quarry pit. Miller's Woods, half-mile past Peterson Trail. Margaret's words tumbled fast. She's pregnant and hurt. Can't get out. Ma'am, we don't typically. She's going to die. Margaret cut her off. The words came hard and certain. There's a puppy here who brought me to her. He's not leaving his mother. Neither am I. Silence on the line. How deep is the pit? Ma'am. 12 feet, give or take. Stay on the line. Fire rescue is on the way. Margaret lowered herself to the ground at the edge of the pit. The cold earth soaked through her pants immediately. Her knee throbbed. She didn't care. The puppy Bruno. She decided. Though she didn't know why, the name came to her curled up against her thigh. His muzzle rested on her leg. His eyes never left his mother below. Margaret started talking. Not because the dog could understand. Because silence felt like giving up. You hang on now. You hear me? They're coming. Just hold on a little longer. The dog's tail moved. Barely. A twitch in the mud, down in the pit. Margaret saw it clearly now, the way the animal's body curved protectively around her belly. Even lying in cold water, injured and starving, she was still trying to shield what grew inside her. Something tightened in Margaret's chest. 2 years ago, she'd sat beside Harold's hospital bed, held his hand, said the same words. Hang on. Help's coming. But no help came. Not the kind that mattered. She'd watched the light leave his eyes on a Tuesday afternoon while rain streaked the window. I won't leave you. Margaret whispered now, to the dog, to herself, to whatever part of Harold might still be listening from somewhere she couldn't see. Bruno licked her hand. His tongue was dry, rough. When had he last eaten? Last had water? Margaret stroked his head, felt the bumps of his spine beneath her fingers, the ridges of old scars on his back. Someone had hurt this puppy. Hurt his mother too. Probably. Hurt them and then let them run. Or maybe they'd escaped on their own. The pregnant dog whimpered below, a sound so small it almost disappeared into the wind. I know. Sweetheart. Margaret's voice cracked. I know it hurts. But you're not alone anymore. You hear me? You're not alone. Minutes passed. 5, 10. The cold seeped deeper into Margaret's bones. Her phone battery showed 12%. The sun dropped lower behind the bare trees, turning the sky the color of a bruise, then sirens. Faint at first, growing louder. Bruno's ears perked up. He stood, body tense, staring toward the sound. Margaret pushed herself to her feet, joints screaming. She waved her arms as the red truck appeared through the trees. Over here. We're over here. The rescue team came crashing through the brush. 3 firefighters with ropes and a stretcher. The one in front stopped at the pit's edge. Looked down. His face changed. Ma'am, he said quietly. You see those marks on her, on the puppy too? Margaret nodded. She'd seen them. The scars, the old wounds. Somebody did that to them, the firefighter said. On purpose? Margaret's hands curled into fists at her sides. I know, she said, and somebody's going to answer for it. The crew chief's name was Jake Morrison. 35, maybe. Square jaw, calm eyes. The kind of man who'd seen enough bad situations to know when one needed quick action and when it needed steady hands. He looked at Margaret, then down at the pit, then back at her, took in her blue lips, her mud-soaked pants, her white-knuckled grip on the tree beside her. Ma'am, you've been out here almost an hour in this cold. Should warm up in the truck. I told her I wouldn't leave. Jake studied her face. Something passed across his expression. He turned to the youngest firefighter. Patterson, get a blanket from the rig. Patterson jogged back through the brush, returned with a heavy wool blanket that smelled like smoke and engine oil. Margaret wrapped it around her shoulders without argument. The warmth hit her body like a wave, and only then did she realize how badly she'd been shivering. All right then, Jake said. Let's get to work. The youngest firefighter, Patterson, according to his jacket, strapped into a harness. The rope system went up quick. Practiced movements, no wasted motion. Jake held the main line while the third man anchored. Patterson went over the edge. Margaret watched him descend, her heart hammering against her ribs. Bruno pressed harder against her leg, his whole body vibrating with tension. The moment Patterson's boots touched the bottom, the dog reacted. A growl, low and weak, but unmistakable. Bella tried to lift her head, her lips pulling back from teeth caked with mud, even broken and starving. The instinct remained. Protect yourself. Trust no one. Bruno barked from above, sharp, insistent, and Bella stopped. Her body relaxed. Her head dropped back to the mud. She watched Patterson approach with wary eyes, but the growl died in her throat. Whatever Bruno had communicated, some signal only they understood, she accepted it. Patterson moved slow, talking soft. Margaret couldn't hear the words from up top, just the tone. Gentle. The way you'd speak to a frightened child. He got the stretcher beneath Bella with careful hands, strapped her in, signaled to Jake. The winch engaged. The stretcher rose inch by inch, swaying slightly in the cold air. Margaret held her breath. Beside her, Bruno whined, dancing on his front paws, unable to stand still. The stretcher cleared the edge. Bruno launched himself forward. His tongue found his mother's face, licking frantically, whimpering sounds escaping his throat that sounded almost human. Margaret dropped to her knees beside them, ignoring the pain that shot through her joints. Her hands found Bella's fur, cold, wet, matted with filth. But underneath, her fingers touched something else. She pushed the fur aside. Scars. White lines crisscrossing the dog's back and flanks. Not random. Not from brambles or fences or the wild. These were deliberate. These were parallel marks where something thin and hard had struck again and again. Deeper grooves around her neck where metal had bitten into flesh. Small circular burns dotted her shoulders. Margaret's stomach turned. 32 years in emergency medicine. She'd seen these patterns before. On women who came in with stories about falling downstairs. On children whose parents had explanations that never quite added up. "What did they do to you, girl?" The words came out before she could stop them. Jake crouched beside her. His jaw tightened as he looked at what Margaret had found. "Puppy's got the same marks," he said quietly. "Noticed them earlier. Didn't want to say anything until we got Mom out." Margaret looked at Bruno. Really looked this time. The thin white lines on his back that she'd dismissed as old injuries. The way he flinched when Patterson moved too fast nearby. The trembling that never quite stopped. Someone had beaten these dogs, starved them, burned them, and they had escaped. Run as far as Bella's pregnant body could carry her before falling into that pit. "Check for a collar," Margaret said. Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Flat, hard. Patterson's gloved hands searched through the matted fur around Bella's neck. His fingers found leather, nearly invisible beneath the filth. "Got something." He pulled it free, a worn collar. The leather cracked and stiff. A metal tag hung from the buckle. Rusted, but still readable. Patterson held it up to the fading light. "Bella," he read. "Garrett Farm." The name hit Margaret like a physical blow. Garrett Farm. 5 miles east of town, old Eugene Garrett's place. Eugene had died last spring. She remembered now. Heart attack in his barn. Found 2 days later by a neighbor checking on him. Quiet man. Kept to himself. But she'd seen him at church sometimes, years back. Always had a dog with him. Treated the animal like family. The farm had gone to his nephew. Some young man from out of state who'd shown up for the funeral and never left. Eugene's nephew, Jake said, echoing her thoughts. Victor. I think his name is. Took over the property after the old man passed. Keeps to himself, mostly. Had some noise complaints about dogs barking all night. But nothing ever came of it. Margaret's hands curled into fists. The cold didn't register anymore. Neither did her aching knee or her wet clothes or the exhaustion pulling at her bones. Someone needs to find out what's happening at that farm. Jake met her eyes. That's a matter for the sheriff, ma'am. Then call him. The rescue truck sat waiting at the edge of the trail. They'd carry Bella to Dr. Sarah Mitchell's clinic in town. The only vet within 30 miles. Margaret stood up. Her legs wobbled but held. I'm going with her. Ma'am, we can't really. That puppy brought me to his mother. Margaret pointed at Bruno, who hadn't moved from Bella's side. He trusted me. I'm not abandoning them now. Jake looked at the old woman in front of him. 68 years old, 5'4", wrapped in a fire department blanket and covered in mud, and absolutely immovable. He sighed. Get in the truck, both of you. Bruno jumped up first, settling himself beside the stretcher where his mother lay. Margaret climbed in after, her body screaming in protest. She sat on the metal bench and placed her hand on Bella's head. The dog's eyes opened. Brown. Deep. Exhausted but aware. "We're going to find out who did this to you," Margaret whispered. "I promise." The truck lurched forward through the darkening woods. Behind them, somewhere past the trees, Garrett Farm waited in the falling dark. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's clinic smelled like antiseptic and wet dog. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a pale glow. Margaret sat on a plastic chair in the corner, the fire department blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, while Sarah worked on Bella. The vet was 45. Practical hands. Gray streaks in her brown hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. The only animal doctor within 30 miles of Millbrook. Her face had gone tight the moment she started the examination. "This dog's been through something awful, Mrs. Thompson." Sarah's gloved fingers moved along Bella's ribs, pressing gently. Severe malnutrition, old fractures that healed wrong, infected wounds that were never treated. She paused at the marks on Bella's shoulders. "These are cigarette burns. Multiple, different ages. Someone did this over months, maybe years." Margaret's hands gripped her knees. "Will she make it? She's a fighter. Got that going for her." Sarah moved to Bella's swollen belly, palpating carefully. "But she's about to give birth tonight. I'd guess. Maybe sooner, and her body's running on fumes. Not much reserve left." Bruno lay curled beneath Margaret's chair, his chin resting on her muddy shoe. He hadn't moved since they'd arrived. His eyes tracked every motion Sarah made, every instrument she picked up. "I'll stay," Margaret said. Sarah looked up, studied the old woman's face, the blue-tinged lips finally warming back to pink. The exhaustion carved into every line, the stubborn set of her jaw. "Didn't figure you'd leave." Sarah turned back to her patient. "Coffee's in the back. Might as well get comfortable." The hours crawled past. Margaret found the coffee, bitter and lukewarm, but she drank it anyway. Her clothes dried stiff against her skin. The heater in the clinic rattled and clanked, but pushed out enough warmth to finally stop her shivering. She called home, no one to answer, but the habit remained. The phone rang in an empty house where Harold's chair sat waiting, and his Sunday paper still lay on the armrest. At some point. Sarah brought her a second blanket from the supply closet. Wool, scratchy. Margaret wrapped it around her legs and kept watch. Bruno slept in fits. His legs twitched. Small whimpers escaped his throat. Dreaming of something running, maybe. Or the pit, or the hands that had hurt him. Margaret reached down and stroked his head until he settled. "Good boy," she murmured. "You did good. Rest now." Outside, the December night pressed against the windows, black and cold and silent. 3 a.m. Margaret jerked awake in her chair, neck stiff, the blankets tangled around her legs. Something had changed. A sound. A shift in the air. Bella. The dog lay on the examination table, her body rigid, her breathing rapid and shallow. Sarah stood beside her. Gloves on. Instruments ready. "It's time," Sarah said without looking up. "You can stay or go. Your choice." Margaret stood. Her joints popped and complained. She moved to the table, positioned herself near Bella's head. "I'm staying." Bella's eyes found hers. Brown, scared, but something else too. Trust. Fragile and new, built in the space of a few hours. "Easy, Mama." Margaret's hand found the soft fur behind Bella's ear. "I'm right here. You're not alone." The first puppy came hard. Bella's body convulsed, muscles straining against exhaustion. Sarah worked with steady hands, guiding, Supporting, a wet bundle emerged, dark fur, tiny limbs, a high-pitched cry that filled the room. Male, Sarah announced. Strong lungs, good size. She cleaned him, checked him over, placed him against Bella's belly. His mouth found what it was looking for. He began to nurse. Bruno had risen from beneath the chair. He stood at the edge of the table now, front paws stretched up, watching everything with wide eyes. His tail wagged once, twice. The second puppy came easier. Female, brown and gold fur, smaller than her brother but squirming with energy. Then the third, male again, gray coat like Bruno's. He didn't breathe at first. Sarah rubbed his chest, cleared his airway, and he gasped into life with a squeaking cry. Margaret's throat tightened. 3 puppies, 3 lives that had almost ended in that muddy pit. One more, Sarah said, her hands back on Bella's belly. I can feel it. Small one. Bella's strength was fading. Her pushes came weaker now, her eyes half closed. Margaret leaned closer, speaking low and steady. Come on, girl. One more. You can do this. Just one more. The 4th puppy slid into Sarah's waiting hands. Female. Black fur, pure as midnight. The smallest of the litter by far. Silent. Sarah turned her over, rubbed her tiny chest. Nothing. She cleared the airway with a suction bulb, stimulated the paws, the belly. Still nothing. Sometimes the little ones, Sarah started. Give her to me. The words came out before Margaret knew she was speaking. She held out her hands. Sarah hesitated, then passed the limp bundle over. The puppy fit in Margaret's palms. Wet, warm, impossibly small. 32 years in maternity had taught her what to do when a newborn wouldn't breathe. She cradled the puppy against her chest, the same motion she'd used 1,000 times at Millbrook General. The same instinct that never left no matter how many years passed. She rubbed the puppy's back in small circles, pressed her lips close to the tiny muzzle and blew. Soft, gentle, the way she'd been taught 40 years ago. 1 breath. 2. A twitch. Margaret kept rubbing, kept breathing. Her own heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her ears. The puppy's chest moved, a sound thin, reedy, but unmistakably alive. The puppy squirmed in her hands, opened her mouth, let out a cry no louder than a whisper. Sarah stared. Well, I'll be... Margaret didn't answer. She placed the puppy beside her siblings, against Bella's warm belly. The tiny black bundle wriggled toward the others, found her place, began to nurse. Bella lifted her head, licked each of her babies in turn. Then she looked at Margaret, a long, steady gaze that needed no words. Bruno scrambled up onto the table. Sarah started to stop him, then didn't. He nuzzled his mother's face, sniffed each of his new siblings, and settled down beside them with a contented sigh. Margaret sank back into her chair. Her hands were shaking, her eyes burned. Harold, she whispered to the empty air. I think I just became a grandma again. Morning light filtered gray through the clinic windows when Sheriff Tom Bradley arrived. He was 58, thick around the middle, gray mustache. He'd been Harold's friend since high school poker nights on Fridays, fishing trips every spring after the funeral. He'd stopped by Margaret's house twice with casseroles his wife had made. Both times, Margaret had thanked him at the door and sent him away. Now he stood in Sarah's clinic, hat in hand, looking at the sleeping dogs. Heard you had quite an adventure, Margaret. I need you to look into Garrett Farm. Tom, something bad happened there. Real bad. Tom's gaze moved over Bella's scars, the marks on Bruno's back. His jaw tightened. Eugene's nephew, Victor, took over after the old man passed. Young fella, about 30, keeps to himself. He scratched his mustache. We've had complaints. Dogs barking at all hours. Bad smells from the property. Never found enough to act on. Look again. Margaret. Look at them. Tom. She pointed at Bella, at Bruno, at the 4 puppies nursing in a pile of warm blankets. Someone did this. Someone who's still out there. Probably doing it to other dogs right now. Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. I'll drive out there today, ask some questions. He came back that afternoon. Margaret had finally dozed off in her chair, exhaustion winning over worry. She woke to the sound of heavy boots on linoleum. Tom's face was gray. The lines around his eyes had deepened. What did you find? Victor's home, nervous as a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Tom pulled a notebook from his pocket, though he didn't open it. Farm's a mess. Saw cages in the barn through the window, 8, maybe 10 dogs, all skin and bones from what I could tell. Called County Animal Control. They're heading out with a warrant. And Victor, playing innocent, says the dogs get loose all the time. Not his fault. Says Bella was always a runner. Tom's voice hardened. But I've got eyes. Margaret. That man's hiding plenty. So what happens now? Animal Control investigates, gathers evidence. If there's enough, and I believe there will be, we filed charges. He paused. But these things take time. Weeks, maybe longer. Margaret looked at Bella sleeping on the clinic table, her puppies tucked safe against her belly. Bruno lay curled at her feet like a sentry. She escaped, Margaret said quietly. Got away from him somehow. Ran until she couldn't run anymore. Fell in that pit. She stroked Bruno's head. And this one went looking for help. Found me on the trail. Tom nodded slowly. Smart dog. Found the right person, too. Dr. Mitchell released Bella on Monday, with strict instructions for rest and careful monitoring. Margaret didn't hesitate. They're coming home with me. Her house had been empty for 2 years, 5 bedrooms, 1 person, silence that pressed in from every corner. Not anymore. She made a bed from old blankets in the spare room, the one Harold used to call his thinking space, back when he still had energy to think. Bella settled onto the soft pile with a sigh that seemed to release years of fear. The puppies nursed and slept and made small sounds that filled the quiet. Bruno stayed close to his mother, but every few minutes he'd trot out to check on Margaret, find her in the kitchen or the living room, or standing at the window watching the empty street. I'm right here, boy. She'd scratch behind his ears. Ain't going nowhere. That first night, she slept 14 hours straight, the deepest sleep she'd had since Harold passed. When she woke, Bruno lay pressed against her side, and from the spare room came the soft sounds of puppies stirring. The second evening, Margaret sat in Harold's chair. She hadn't touched it in 2 years, hadn't been able to. But now she sank into the worn cushion, felt the familiar shape of him in the fabric, and it didn't hurt the way she'd expected. Bruno jumped up and curled in her lap. The radio played softly, WSBA, the oldies station Harold always loved. Patsy Cline sang about being crazy. Margaret stroked the puppy's head. Not so crazy anymore. She murmured, Are we, boy, in the spare room? Bella slept deeply for the first time in what might have been years. And on the table beside Harold's chair, Margaret's phone buzzed with a voicemail from Tom Bradley, Margaret, it's Tom. Call me back when you get this. Victor Garrett just hired himself a lawyer. Says he wants his dogs back. 2 weeks passed. The puppies grew. Their eyes opened 4 pairs of brown, curious and bright. They stumbled around the spare room on unsteady legs, tumbling over each other, making sounds that ranged from squeaks to tiny growls. Margaret named them Scout, the big black male who explored every corner, Maple, the brown female with the white patch on her chest, Ash, the gray one who reminded her so much of Bruno, and Hope, the little black female she'd breathed life into that first night. Bella healed slower. Her leg would never be quite right. Dr. Mitchell had said it as best she could, but the bone had been broken too long before treatment. She walked with a limp now, favoring her front left. But her eyes had changed. The fear that lived there was fading, replaced by something softer. Trust. Maybe. Or the beginning of it. Bruno never strayed far from his mother's side. He'd grown too, filling out now that regular meals had become a certainty. The scars on his back had faded to thin silver lines beneath his thickening fur. Margaret's house had transformed. Toys scattered across the living room floor, food bowls in the kitchen. The smell of dog everywhere, not unpleasant, just different, alive. For the first time in 2 years, she didn't dread the mornings. The knock came on a Wednesday afternoon. 4 o'clock. Margaret was in the kitchen, mixing puppy food in a metal bowl. Bruno's head snapped up from where he lay by the back door. A growl rumbled in his chest, low, deep, unfamiliar. Margaret froze. She'd never heard him make that sound before. The knock came again, harder. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and walked to the front door. Bruno followed, pressing against her leg, that growl still vibrating through his body. She opened the door. The man on her porch was young 30, maybe 31, tall and thin, with sharp cheekbones and pale eyes that didn't match his smile. He wore clean jeans and a canvas jacket, work boots that had never seen real work. "Mrs. Thompson." His voice was pleasant. His eyes were not. "Can I help you? I believe you have something that belongs to me." He glanced past her into the house. "Bella, German Shepherd, wandered off my property a few weeks back. Been looking everywhere for her." Margaret's hand tightened on the doorframe. She didn't wander off. "Excuse me." She ran, got herself into a quarry pit trying to get away from whatever was happening at your place. Margaret kept her voice level. "I found her. Or rather, her puppy found me." The man's smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Dogs get loose sometimes. Happens on farms. But she's registered under Garrett Farm. My property now, since my uncle passed." He reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a folded paper. "Got the documentation right here. So if you'll just point me to where you're keeping her." "No." The word came out flat, final. Victor Garrett's smile flickered. "Ma'am, I'm trying to be reasonable here. That dog and her pups, they're mine by law. I can come back with the sheriff and a court order if that's how you want to play this." Bruno's growl had stopped. Margaret looked down. The puppy wasn't growling anymore. He was shaking, pressed against her leg, trembling. His eyes fixed on Victor with naked terror. He remembered. This was the man who had hurt him. Margaret looked back at Victor, at his pleasant smile and his cold eyes and his clean boots. "You call what happened to these dogs reasonable?" Her voice hardened. "I've seen the scars, the burns, the bones that healed wrong because nobody bothered to set them. I don't know what stories you've cooked up in your head, lady. But get off my porch. Victor's smile vanished. Those are my dogs. I've got every legal right. Then get your court order. Margaret straightened to her full height, 5'4", 130 pounds, 68 years old. Because you ain't touching them while I'm standing here. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Victor's jaw worked. His hands flexed at his sides. Then he stepped back. See you real soon, Mrs. Thompson. He walked to his pickup, mud-splattered, the bed lined with empty wire cages, and climbed in. The engine roared. He pulled away without looking back. Margaret closed the door, locked it, slid the chain into place. Her hands were shaking. Bruno pressed against her leg, still trembling. She sank down to the floor and wrapped her arms around him. It's okay, boy. Her voice came out rough. I won't let him take you, I promise. But even as she said it, the cold truth settled in her stomach. Victor had papers, registration, legal ownership, and Margaret had nothing but a rescue story and a house full of dogs that didn't belong to her. The Millbrook Gazette ran the story 4 days later. Jenny Walsh, 28, had been the only reporter at the paper for 2 years now. She'd interviewed Margaret in the living room while the puppies climbed over each other on the rug, and Bella watched from her bed by the window. The headline, Local Woman Rescues Pregnant Dog Uncovers Suspected Animal Abuse at Garrett Farm. The phone started ringing that same morning. Pastor Michael from First Baptist. The congregation's praying for you. Margaret, whatever you need. You just ask. Dolores Finch from 3 houses down, 72 years old, standing on the porch with a casserole dish. Bravest thing anyone's done in this town in years. Don't you let that Garrett boy push you around. Here, the pet supply store on Main Street sent 2 50-pound bags of premium dog food. No charge. The card read, for Bella and her babies, keep fighting. But there were other calls too. Mind your own business. A man's voice growled into her answering machine before hanging up. Garrett's been in this county 4 generations. Another message said, Who do you think you are? Margaret let the machine take those, erased them without listening to the end. The letter arrived by certified mail the following Monday. Margaret opened it at the kitchen table, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Legal language, dense and threatening. Victor Garrett, represented by Morrison and Associates, was demanding the return of his property, 1 adult female German Shepherd and 4 German Shepherd puppies within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in civil action for theft, conversion of property, and damages. She called Dr. Mitchell. I got a copy too, Sarah said. As the treating veterinarian, they're claiming I aided in the theft. A pause. Margaret, legally, he might have a case. Ownership laws for animals in Pennsylvania, they're complicated. Dogs are considered property. If he's got registration papers showing Bella belongs to Garrett Farm. So I'm just supposed to hand them back, let him finish what he started. I didn't say that. I'm saying we need to be smart about this. Careful. Margaret hung up, walked to the spare room where Bella lay sleeping, the 4 puppies curled against her belly. Bruno standing guard at the foot of the bed. There's got to be another way, she said to the quiet room. Bella lifted her head, those brown eyes trusting now. Calm met Margaret's. Outside, a car door slammed, footsteps on the porch. Another knock, harder than before. Margaret's stomach dropped. She walked to the front door, looked through the peephole. Not Victor. A woman. Blonde. Expensive coat. Holding a thick folder of papers. Behind her, a white van with blue lettering on the side, County Animal Control. The animal control officer's name was Karen Whitfield. She smiled too much and spoke in a voice that sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced being sympathetic in front of a mirror. "Mrs. Thompson, I want to assure you this is just a routine wellness check. Mr. Garrett has filed a formal complaint, and we're obligated to investigate." Margaret stood in her own doorway, blocking the entrance with her body behind her. Bruno had started that low growl again. "Those dogs were abused. Your office has the report. We're aware of the allegations, ma'am. That's part of what we're here to assess." Karen's smile never wavered. "May we come in?" It wasn't really a question. The courthouse smelled like floor wax and old paper. Margaret sat on a wooden bench outside courtroom B, her hands folded in her lap, her good dress, the navy blue one she'd worn to Harold's funeral, pressed and clean. 6 weeks since the rescue. 6 weeks of feeding and caring and watching Bella learn to trust again. 6 weeks of something that felt like hope. Now this. The mediation hearing had lasted 40 minutes. Victor Garrett sat on one side with his lawyer, a young man in an expensive suit who used words like property rights and legal ownership and theft of livestock. Margaret sat alone on the other side. She couldn't afford an attorney. Hadn't thought she'd need one. Judge Robert Hayes, 62, had listened to both sides with a face that gave nothing away. Then he delivered his ruling, 30-day hold. Margaret would retain temporary custody while animal control completed their investigation. Victor was prohibited from approaching her or the animals during that period. It felt like a small victory. Then she walked outside. The crowd had gathered while she was in the courtroom. Maybe 20 people. Some held signs, "Justice for Bella," and "Stop Animal Abuse." Margaret's heart lifted for a moment. Then she saw the others, arms crossed, faces hard. A man she didn't recognize stepped forward as she came down the steps. "Mind your own business, lady." His voice carried across the parking lot. "Garrett's been in this county since before you were born." Margaret kept walking, head down, keys in her hand. "Crazy old woman," someone else called out. A woman's voice this time. "Stealing people's property. Got nothing better to do with your time." Her foot caught on the curb. She stumbled forward, arms windmilling, and went down hard on one knee. Her palm scraped against the asphalt. Blood welled up in thin red lines. Laughter. Someone was laughing. Margaret pushed herself up. Her knee throbbed. Her hand stung. Her face burned so hot she could feel her pulse in her cheeks. She found her car. Harold's old Buick, the one she kept meaning to sell, and fumbled with the lock. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The keys slipped, fell. She bent to pick them up and heard more laughter behind her. Finally inside, door closed, windows up. The tears came before she could stop them. The phone rang at 7:30 that evening. Margaret sat in the dark living room, the television off, the radio silent. Bruno lay at her feet, but she hadn't reached down to pet him, hadn't moved in over an hour. Her scraped palm still stung. Her knee had swollen to twice its normal size. Seattle area code. "David." She answered. "Mom, what is going on?" Her son's voice was sharp, clipped. "I saw the news online. There's a video you falling outside a courthouse while people yell at you. What is this? Hello to you too, David. This isn't funny. You're in some kind of lawsuit over dogs. They were being hurt, starved, beaten. I couldn't just walk away." David's exhale crackled through the speaker. "Mom, you're 68 years old. You live alone in a 5-bedroom house. You don't need this kind of trouble." "It's not trouble. It's the right thing to do." Silence stretched between them. Miles and miles of silence. I talked to a lawyer friend of mine. David's voice dropped lower. Careful now. Measured. If this Garrett guy wins the civil case, he can come after you for damages, legal fees, court costs. Could be tens of thousands. I don't care about money. The house. Mom. The words came out slowly, like he was explaining something to a child. Dad's house. If he gets a judgment against you, he could put a lien on the property, force a sale. Margaret's breath stopped. That's what you're worried about, the house. I'm worried about you. But something in his voice didn't match. Something hollow. Something that sounded more like calculation than concern. You've been alone too long. David continued. You're not thinking straight, making decisions based on emotion instead of sense. Maybe you should talk to someone. A professional. A therapist. Someone who can help you work through. You think I'm crazy. Mom. All those people out there today, calling me a crazy old woman. And my own son agrees with them. That's not what Your father would be ashamed. The words came out before she could stop them. Cold. Hard. He spent 41 years teaching you right from wrong. And this is what you learned. To worry about property values while animals suffer. Don't bring Dad into this. He's already in it. He's been in it since the day I found that dog in the pit. Margaret's grip on the phone made her injured palm scream. Don't call me again, David. Not until you remember what he taught you about doing right when it's hard. She hung up. The phone sat silent in her hand. The screen glowed, then dimmed, then went dark. Midnight. Margaret hadn't moved from Harold's chair. Bruno had given up trying to comfort her an hour ago, retreating to the spare room where Bella and the puppies slept. The house pressed in around her. 5 bedrooms, empty, silent. Crazy old woman, stealing people's property. Got nothing better to do. Maybe they were right. Maybe she was losing her mind. A lonely widow with too much time and not enough sense. Fighting battles nobody asked her to fight. Harold would have known what to do. Harold always knew. But Harold was gone. 2 years on the ground, and she still made 2 cups of coffee every morning, still kept his chair empty, still talked to him like he might answer. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't recognize. She looked at the screen. 3 words. I know where you live. 3 in the morning. A sound pulled Margaret from the chair where she'd fallen asleep. Thin, high, coming from the spare room. She stood. Her neck screamed from the awkward angle. Her back popped in 3 places. The threatening text still glowed on her phone screen, but she didn't look at it again. Couldn't. The sound came again. A whimper. Margaret walked down the hallway, her bare feet cold on the hardwood floor Harold had installed 20 years ago. The spare room door stood open. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting pale shadows across the bed where Bella slept. The puppies lay in a pile against their mother's belly. 3 of them. Scout, Maple, Ash. But Hope, the smallest one, the one Margaret had breathed life into, had wiggled away from the warmth. She lay near the edge of the blanket, shivering, crying in that thin voice that had woken Margaret from her stupor. Margaret bent down. Her joints protested. Her swollen knee nearly buckled. She didn't care. She scooped the tiny puppy into her hands. Hope fit in her palms, warm and trembling, her black fur soft as velvet. Margaret pressed her against her chest, feeling the rapid heartbeat through her nightgown. Shh, little one. Her voice came out rough, barely a whisper. I got you. Hope's crying stopped. She burrowed into the fabric, seeking warmth, seeking safety. Her small body relaxed against Margaret's skin, and in that moment, in the dark of 3 in the morning, Something shifted. Who cares what they think? The thought came unbidden, clear and sharp as broken glass. Who cares what David thinks? Who cares what the whole town thinks? This puppy needed her. Right now. Right here. This small life that hadn't wanted to start, that Margaret had coaxed into existence with her own breath, this life depended on her. Not on lawyers, not on judges, not on David in Seattle or the angry strangers outside the courthouse, on her. Margaret looked down at Hope, at the tiny ears pressed flat, the closed eyes, the trust that radiated from every fiber of that small body. Harold's voice came to her then. Not a memory exactly, something deeper. Something she carried in her bones. Maggie. The world doesn't need more people doing what's easy. It needs people doing what's right. Especially when it's hard. He'd said that the night before his first chemotherapy session. Sitting in this very house. In his chair. Scared but steady. He'd known what was coming. Known the odds. But he'd faced it anyway. Margaret placed Hope back with her siblings, tucking the tiny body against Bella's warm belly. The puppy squirmed once, found her place, and went still. Bella's eyes opened, brown and deep and trusting. I know, girl. Margaret stroked the soft fur behind Bella's ear. I know. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, turned on the light. 3:15 in the morning. Her legal pad sat on the counter where she'd left it weeks ago. She flipped to a clean page, found a pen, started writing. Jenny Walsh answered on the fourth ring. Mrs. Thompson. Sleep thickened her voice. It's 6 in the morning. I need your help. Not for me. For those dogs. A pause. Rustling. Jenny clearing the fog from her head. What kind of help? The truth about Garrett Farm. All of it. Margaret gripped the phone. Eugene Garrett was a good man. I remember him from church. Years ago. He loved his animals. Treated them like family. His nephew is something else entirely. She paused. I want to know what happened to Eugene's dogs after he died. What Victor did to them. And I need proof. Mrs. Thompson, that's risky territory. Victor's got friends around here. People who've known his family for generations. I know. Met some of them outside the courthouse yesterday. Silence on the line. What exactly are you looking for? Witnesses, records, anything that proves a pattern of abuse. Margaret looked at the notes she'd made during the night. Names, dates, questions. Someone sold dogs to Eugene over the years. Someone bought puppies from Victor after he took over. Someone saw what was happening and stayed quiet because it was easier than speaking up. That could take weeks to track down. Then we better start now. The evidence came in pieces. Some doors slammed shut. Some people hung up the phone the moment Jenny mentioned Garrett Farm. But she kept digging, and Margaret kept pushing. And slowly the picture emerged. Jenny found neighbors who'd heard dogs screaming at night, not barking. Screaming and called the county line, but never followed up when nothing happened. She found a woman in the next town over who'd bought a puppy from Victor 8 months ago. The dog had arrived malnourished, terrified of sudden movements, covered in flea bites that had gone untreated for weeks. The woman had photos, veterinary records, a written statement. Dr. Mitchell pulled records from clinics across the region. 3 German shepherds from Garrett Farm had been brought in over the past 2 years, all with signs of severe neglect. All listed as strays to avoid questions about their origin. Tom Bradley dug deeper into the county files. The noise complaints Margaret had heard about. The smell complaints from neighboring properties. Reports filed and forgotten, warnings issued and ignored. And then Jenny found the photograph. Eugene Garrett's Facebook page, untouched since his death. A picture from 4 years ago, Bella as a young dog, healthy and glossy, curled on Eugene's lap in a worn recliner. The old man's face creased with joy, one weathered hand resting on her head. The caption read, "My best girl Bella, loyal to the bone." Jenny placed that photo next to a picture of Bella, now thin, despite weeks of good food, scarred, her eyes still carrying shadows even in rest. "This is what he did," Jenny said quietly. "This is the proof." The final hearing came 3 months after the rescue. Courtroom B again. The same wooden benches, the same wax smell, the same fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. But this time, Margaret wasn't alone. Dr. Mitchell sat behind her with a folder of medical records 2 inches thick. Tom Bradley had his report from Animal Control, 8 dogs removed from Garrett Farm, all showing signs of long-term abuse and neglect. Jenny Walsh had printed every piece of evidence they'd gathered: photographs, witness statements, veterinary records spanning 2 years of systematic cruelty. Margaret had used Harold's life insurance money to hire a lawyer. It was money she'd been saving for nothing in particular. Now she had a purpose for it. Victor Garrett sat across the aisle with his attorney. His face was calm, but his leg bounced under the table. His eyes kept darting to the stack of papers on Margaret's side. Judge Hayes reviewed the evidence for 20 minutes. The courtroom stayed silent except for the shuffle of pages and the scratch of his pen. Then he looked up. "Mr. Garrett, do you have any response to these findings?" Victor stood. His jaw worked. His hands gripped the table edge. "Those are my dogs." His voice cracked. "I've got every legal—" "Mr. Garrett." Judge Hayes removed his glasses, set them on the bench. "I've reviewed the testimony, the photographs, the veterinary records documenting years of systematic abuse and neglect." His voice was cold, measured. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm ruling in favor of Mrs. Thompson. The dogs will remain in her permanent custody." Victor's face went red. "You can't. Furthermore, I'm recommending that the district attorney's office review these findings for potential criminal charges." The judge's gaze was steady. "Animal cruelty is a felony in Pennsylvania. Mr. Garrett, you might want to discuss that with your lawyer." Victor's attorney put a hand on his arm, whispered something urgent. Victor shook him off, but he sat down. His leg had stopped bouncing. His face had gone pale. Margaret stood, her knees held steady. Her hands didn't shake. She nodded once to Judge Hayes, turned, walked out of the courtroom. No smile, no celebration. Just one thing finished. And outside, in the spring sunshine she hadn't expected to see, Tom Bradley was waiting with a look on his face that made her stomach tighten. "Margaret, we need to talk about Victor. He didn't take the ruling well. Tom's warning turned out to be unnecessary. Victor Garrett left town 3 days after the ruling, packed his truck in the middle of the night, and drove east, leaving behind an empty farmhouse and a trail of debts. The district attorney filed charges anyway: animal cruelty, neglect, failure to provide adequate care. A warrant sat waiting if Victor ever came back to Pennsylvania. He never did. Spring arrived early that year. Margaret sat on the front porch, a cup of tea cooling in her hands. The morning air carried the smell of wet earth and new-growth crocuses pushing up through the flower beds she'd finally tended after 2 years of neglect. The maple tree budding green at the tips of its branches. Bella lay at her feet, stretched out in a patch of warm sunshine. Her coat had grown back thick and glossy, though the limp remained. It always would. But she moved easier now, trusted easier, slept without whimpering through nightmares. The puppies weren't puppies anymore. 4 months old, leggy and energetic. They tumbled across the front yard in a blur of fur and teeth and joyful noise. Scout, the big black male, had gone to live with Officer Danny Reyes and his 2 young daughters across town. Margaret had watched him climb into their minivan, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. Maple found her home with Ruth Henderson, the retired school teacher on Oak Street. 74 years old, lived alone, needed a reason to get up in the mornings. Maple gave her one. Ash went to Dr. Mitchell. Occupational hazard, Sarah had said with a shrug when she signed the adoption papers. Can't save them all and not keep one eventually. But Hope stayed. The little black female, the one who hadn't wanted to breathe. The one Margaret had coaxed into life at 3 a.m. She belonged here. She lay on the porch now, her head resting on Margaret's foot, watching the world with calm brown eyes. Bruno sat on the top step, surveying the yard like a general inspecting his troops. He'd grown into his frame, filled out. Lost the desperate thinness that had marked him when he first grabbed Margaret's coat in the woods. But his eyes still checked on Bella every few minutes, still tracked Margaret's movements whenever she left a room. The phone rang inside the house. Margaret didn't rush. Let it ring 3 times. 4. Then pushed herself up from the chair and walked inside. Seattle area code. She picked up. Mom? David. Silence. The kind that carried weight. I saw the news. His voice was different, quieter. About the ruling. About the charges against Garrett. Mom. I'm sorry. The words came out rough, unpracticed. What I said before about the house, about you needing help, I was wrong. I was thinking about myself, about what I might lose. A pause. Dad would have been disappointed in me. Margaret looked out the window at Bella sleeping in the sun. Your father was never disappointed in you. Frustrated sometimes, but never disappointed. I want to come visit. If that's okay. David's breath crackled through the speaker. I want to meet them, the dogs. And I want to be around more. Actually be there. Not just 7-minute phone calls. Margaret didn't answer right away. 2 years of waiting for a son who never came. Then come. They'd like to meet you. The afternoon stretched warm and golden. Margaret sat back in her porch chair. Hope had climbed into her lap, too big for it now. But neither of them cared. Bruno had moved to Harold's old spot by the door. The radio played softly through the open window. WSBA. Dolly Parton singing something about coming home again. Dolores Finch walked past on the sidewalk, heading to the grocery store. She waved. Beautiful day, Margaret. Sure is. Dolores, sure is. Inside the house. 3 coffee cups sat on the kitchen counter, one for her. One she poured into Bella's water bowl each morning, and one she set on the table beside Harold's chair. Same as always. Morning, sweetheart, she said to him each day. You won't believe what these dogs got into yesterday. Hope shifted in her lap, pressing closer. Margaret stroked the soft black fur, feeling the steady heartbeat beneath her palm. Bruno lifted his head. Those brown eyes met hers, the same eyes that had begged her for help on a cold December afternoon. He didn't need to beg anymore. Outside, the spring sun warmed the earth. Somewhere down the street, children laughed, and in the house that had been silent for 2 years, 6 hearts beat together. If you've stayed this long, you've carried something with me. A heaviness, perhaps. or something tender that stirred in places you thought had gone quiet. That's all right. Stories like this one have a way of settling into us when we aren't expecting it. Many of us know what it feels like to wonder if we're still needed, to wake in a house that holds more silence than it used to pour that second cup of coffee out of habit, then stand there looking at it. Some of us have loved without anyone noticing. Some of us have done the right thing and been called foolish for it. Some of us have talked to people who can no longer answer, just to hear ourselves say their names out loud. You don't need to make sense of what you felt while listening. You don't need to turn it into something useful or carry it forward into tomorrow. Some things are allowed to simply be felt and then set down gently, like a letter you finally finished reading. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for letting this story sit beside you for a little while.